Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me in here this morning. Oh, that's a good point. Start the timer. So I need to start my talk this morning with a little bit of a story. Basically, a speaker friend at the breakfast table this morning told me exactly what type of talk this is. This is a spite talk. And this talk came about because in 2020, I was giving a talk at Azure Live in the Netherlands. It was in the middle of lockdown. The actual speakers were invited to an old church, which is a headquarters of the company that was sponsoring it. And then obviously everybody's online outside. About between an hour and 30 minutes before my talk, a fellow speaker asked me, so what are you going to be talking about today? Authentication with Azure Static Web Apps. Oh yeah, they're kind of fun. But it's just a hobby. They're not like real serious tech, are they? You can't do anything with them. This is not the thing to say to a speaker an hour before they talk on their chosen subject. But the great thing is, in annoying me so much, it also triggered me. I have to prove this person wrong. There's no way around that. You cannot dunk on my chosen technology and I can't give an answer. And so this talk was born. I wanted to prove that you can use static web apps in an enterprise environment and get the full control, move away from that hobby site for which they are spectacular and move into something more robust. It's like, right, where am I going to concentrate on to prove them wrong? And I thought, well, the pipeline is kind of the obvious one here. If you've ever used an Azure Static Web App, you create it in the portal, you connect it to your GitHub repo or Azure DevOps repo, and it gives you a full CI/CD pipeline out of the box. It is spectacular. I still love it. But I don't think that my boss or our CTO are going to be happy if I say, hey, every app we make, we're just going to be making it inside of the portal now and hoping nothing goes wrong. So we're going to make this a little bit more enterprise friendly. So we're going to be looking at the command lines that we need to use. And hopefully in, 37 minutes, we are going to have a working app live with a custom domain. And I generally give this talk in an hour, so there's some stuff that I've had to trim down. If I've trimmed down too much, we're going to try and look at custom auth as well, but I give no promises there. So, hello again. I'm Stacy Cashmore. I am Tech Explorer DevOps for a company called Omniplan in the Netherlands. We make financial advice software. I have been developing since the mid-1990s, and I think that next year I'm going to cut that line out of my intro because it makes me feel really old. And since 2020, I've been lucky enough to be able to call myself a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. I've been involved in static web apps since they were in preview. I've always loved the idea. Shameless self-promotion. I'm just finishing off the second edition of my static web app book, which I'm going to put a picture of on the screen when we get to the end. But for now, let's get rid of the slides and let's have a look at some code. So I have, if I can open it correctly, isn't it great? You set everything up and then your code space restarts. So let's hope that Codespaces is doing it, otherwise we're going to be doing it in a different way. I did check earlier, but is that readable from the back? Awesome, thank you. So what we're going to be doing when it eventually loads my repo, please be nice. I traveled a long way yesterday, thank you. So we have here, let's close these ones, there we go, there's my repo, awesome. What I have here is the repo from the blog editing software that I make inside of my book. Told you, shameless self-promotion here. And what we're going to do is just turn it into something that can be deployed on demand. We can get rid of all of the code space errors. You can go, can you go? Yes, you can go too, awesome. And like I say, I am cheating a little bit. You don't want to see me do lots of typos, and if you do, don't worry, that will probably come. We're going to implement 3 pipelines today. The first one is going to set up the Azure resource itself. The second one is going to give us a custom domain on that resource. And the third one is going to be our code deploy, looking at how we can do staging and reproduce what you get out of the box, but in a way where you have full control. So let's first of all do the build and deploy. So let's move this to workflow. Yes, I'm sure I want to move it. And if we open this, I'm assuming most people here are, they know about GitHub actions and workflows and things, so I don't need to go too deep into the basics there. Okay. So what I have here is, no, that's the wrong one. I did build and deploy. Stupid, Stacy. Let's move that one back and do the one that I actually want, which is the infrastructure of code, because we can't deploy if we don't have any infrastructure, can we? That's better. So we have a workflow that we're just going to dispatch when we want it to, because let's face it, you're not going to redeploy your resources that often. We're going to get our code, and then we're going to start off just by logging into Azure. We're using an app for this inside of Azure so that we can do this all nicely. Everything's in secrets. Don't reveal your secrets in logs. Make sure you keep everything safe. And this is going to give us access to the functionality we need to run it. And basically, this workflow is really easy. We are going to set up the AZ command line so that it can install any extensions that it finds it needs throughout the workflow. We're going to create a resource group. We are then going to deploy our static web app to that resource group, and we're going to do that using a bicep file. I'll show you that one in a second. I just have the minimum possible bicep file just to show you where you can find it. And we're going to deploy that in case we have time to do the authentication. We're deploying that in the standard tier. So I am going to be paying for this. I think it's like €9 a month these days, something like that. It's not over the top, but it's okay. Once we have our static web app just deployed via Bicep, then we can really come into how do we control our Azure Static Web App from within our pipelines. So here we have the connection strings that we're going to be setting inside of our app. Inside the AZ, we have the static web app library, and that allows you to do about 75% of the things that you need to do with Azure Static Web Apps, and I hope that changes in the future. We can access this just by passing in the name of the web app and the resource group, and then we can do the base stuff that we want here, which is just set our environment variables. So I'm going to be connecting to a Cosmos DB database, and if we get around to it, then we're going to be using some auth0 functionality, so we need the client ID and we need the client's secret. There are 2 ways to set environment variables inside of Azure Static Web Apps from the command line, and it's kind of really annoying because they have just a tiny little bit of different syntax since about 6 months. So all of a sudden, all my demo code stopped working 6 months ago. And that is the setting name. If you are setting a singular, you use setting name. If you want to use multiple, then you do setting names. This takes too long to run. However, it doesn't matter how many settings you set, it takes about the same amount of time to run. So if you're setting multiple, always make sure that you use the setting names. You will speed up your process tremendously if you're doing multiple in there. So what are we actually going to be deploying? Let's go down and find our bicep file. We're going to be setting the location to be where we want it to be. In my case, I believe that's going to be Western Europe because I live in the Netherlands. We're passing in the name because you need to name this thing. Fun one about naming static web apps, they only have to be unique for the resource group you are in. So you don't need to make them globally unique as you do with some other Azure resources. And then we're going to default the SKU to free, but you saw I'm overriding that inside of my pipeline. You can do a lot more from here, but for the purposes of a 40-minute talk, this will get you a working Azure Static Web App deployed from the pipeline. So let's come in here and see what it thinks I've changed. Oh, I've moved it. That's good. So let's do a add IAC. Check that I'm on the correct branch. Yes, that should work. So let's commit and sync that. And then if we come up to here and we go to GitHub, and we come to this folder, we now have our workflow directory. And if we come to actions, we have our create and setup infrastructure. So let's kick that off, and let's hope it doesn't crash. It didn't last night when I ran through this. That means nothing for the day of a demo, but we'll see. Come on, you're supposed to have been kicked off by now. There we go. By the way, has everybody here seen what you get out of the box from an Azure Static Web App, or shall I quickly show that whilst this is deploying? So I'm going to show one, and it's not going to be quite standard. It's going to be like semi-tampered with. This is for my personal website. Don't look at the code quality. This is kind of what you get out of the box. I have made some changes here. I wanted to be in charge of building my own code, so I've changed some things. But you get a CI/CD workflow where you can do pushes to main or pull requests. When you are doing a push to main, or when you're in a pull request that isn't being closed, ignore all this top stuff. You get, is this going to work? Hey, that works. You get this part here. So the build and deploy. What this does, it is a single action. It passes in a token which gets set by the portal when you create your Azure Static Web App. And if you put the action to be uploading, then it will check, are you in a pull request or are you on a standard push? It will build your code. It will figure out what language you're using. It will set up the Azure resource for that. If you have a function, it figures out what runtime you want, provisions that in the background as well, and then upload your code. If you're in a pull request, it creates an environment. Upload your code to that. Then it will put a comment in your pull request saying, hey, it's built. You can test here. And that doesn't work anymore because Git had changed their permissions, and this function hasn't been updated to work with that yet. So hopefully that's going to come soon. The things that I put in here extra are these two. You can skip the build when yep. I can try and make the font bigger. You're welcome. So you can skip the building when it comes to using this out-of-the-box functionality. So everything I'm doing today in my own pipelines, if you really just wanted to use this, you could still use this. But personally, I prefer to have the control for more serious things, which is why I rewrite it when I'm doing it for myself. Finally, because cleaning up is a good thing, especially in Azure Static Web Apps, you have 2 staging environments for the free tier and 5, I believe, for the paid tier. When you close a pull request, it will clear up that environment for you so you don't leave it behind. Okay, has that worked? Look at that, we have a green tick. I like green ticks. They help my stress. So we have an Azure Static Web App, and if we come into here, we should have all of our stuff. Come on, you're supposed to give me a link that I can click on. And you're not going to, are you? Fine, we'll do it the hard way. If I come into my portal, and we look for our resource groups. Where's my resource groups? That one, I believe. Not that one, I believe. Which resource group did I use? I could have sworn it was that one. Or it could be that one. Here we go. So here is the resource that we just deployed. If we have a look at our, where are our environment variables? We should see 3 variables. We see 2. Why did it not put the last 2 in? I'll look at that later. But we have it set up, and we should be able to go to, hopefully, a salmon pebble, and we have a website. So that is our IAC sorted. If we ever need to change settings or anything else, we can just rerun that pipeline, and it will update it for us. Next step is, whilst it's great that you can pick your own name for your static web app, it's kind of not great that you get that salmon pebble stream of numbers .1 whatever. We want something that makes sense. So we're going to add our custom domain next. So move that one. This is a much longer workflow, because you have to do some interesting things to make sure you don't break other stuff. But we're going to go through this, and that should give us enough time to actually deploy the application afterwards. When you are deploying a custom domain to an Azure Static Web App, there are 2 domains that you need to do, probably. You want your www.stacy-clouds.net, and you want stacy-clouds.net to make sure that you do the apex and your www domain. I'm setting this up using Azure DNS because it's something that everybody can use. My previous demos used Porkbun because that's my domain provider. But yeah, if you're not using Porkbun, that's kind of no use to you. So put everything into Azure for this. So of course, we need to log in to our static web app again, our Azure command line again. Then we're going to be using this AZ Static Web App command again, and we are going to get a list of all of the environments that we have, because remember we can have staging environments inside of there, and we want the default hostname. That is going to be the one that is our production environment. We're going to store that in a variable, and then we're going to move on. Then we need to start doing our DNS work. When you are setting up your www, you need to add a CNAME record to your domain to prove that you own that domain that you are trying to attach to your static web app. So we have to run some queries. Go away, mouse over text. I don't need you. So the first thing we're going to do is use the AZ Network DNS, and we are going to check to see whether or not we already have a CNAME record set up for this site. If we do have that record, thank you. If we do have that record and it's pointing to our current host name, our work is done, we can go relax. If it's not, then we have to update it. I cannot find a way to update DNS names, which is really annoying. So the first thing you have to do is delete it. And then after we've deleted it, we'll create a new one again. So that sets up our www environment. After that, we need to do our apex record. So this one inside of Azure DNS is totally different to outside. You cannot set an A record in Azure DNS pointing to your static web app. What you instead have to do is actually attach your static web app to your Azure DNS, and then it takes care of it automatically for you. So here we have to go through some quite different steps. We need to get the resource ID for our Azure Static Web App, because if you can use your resource group and your static web app name, why wouldn't you want a big horrible string that nobody's ever going to be able to read? Once we have that, we do exactly the same thing. We do a check. Does this already exist, and is it already applied to our current static web app? If it is, again, our work is done. We can chill. If it's not, then again, we have to update it, and by update it, I mean delete it and recreate it manually. Which is what we have down to here. Once we have all of that, then we can start doing the actual work inside of our Azure Static Web App, again using that AZ Static Web App, and we're going to set the host name to be whatever our www.domain name is at the top. That no wait at the end is super important. These functions can run in like 10 seconds, and they can run in like 12 hours. So make sure that you're not waiting on this to finish. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to get timeouts. You're not going to be happy. That one is super easy because there's nothing else we need to do to the Azure Static Web App here. It will go, it will check that CNAME record. It will check that you've got the right answer to the CNAME query. And if everything's working, it validates and you're all good. Setting the Apex host name is a little bit more tricky. There we don't use the host name in order to prove that we own it. We have to do text validation. Unfortunately, to get that text validation, it's a little bit chicken and egg. In order to set it up, you have to be able to answer that text validation. In order to get that text validation, you have to tell it to try and create the record. So that's exactly what we're doing here. We are telling the Azure Static Web App, set up my Apex domain and use a text token. And again, don't wait for it to come back, because this, again, can take anywhere from 5 seconds to 30 minutes in order to get your token. This then comes to be the problem. What do we do now? Because how do we continue in our pipeline if we don't have this information available to us? Well, basically, we just do a lot of sleeping. So we check to see whether or not we have a token that we can use. If we do, then we break and we continue the flow. If we don't, then we just go to sleep for an amount of time. I think I've got this set to like 25 minutes before it dies. Most of the time, it's done within like 5 to 10. Sometimes it's really not, but I've never had it time out on me. So, of course, saying that, just before I do this, it's going to time out on me today. Guaranteed. Once we have that record, then we can set up our Azure DNS again, making sure that whilst it continues to validate in the background, we update the DNS record, and it will occasionally go and check to see whether or not that record's good. A big interesting one here is if we have existing tokens, it's a text record. It's a text token. We have no idea what it should be previously to what it is now. You can have multiple of these records. We don't know whether or not they should be cleaned up because it's an old deploy that we've had to remove for whatever reason, or whether or not it's in use for something else. So we don't do any cleanup at this stage. All we do is check to see whether or not there is a token for this, a record for this token. If there is, then we tell the user, we put that in the log. It's like, hey, multiple tokens here. You might want to clean up. You need to check this. I can't do it for you. And otherwise, we set the token. And with 197 workflow, it's a bit stupid to say, and that's it. But that's all we need to do. We basically just generate a CNAME record, generate an Apex token, and Azure takes care of the rest for us. So let us push that forward. And see here, go back to our actions. So let's run this one and hope that it works. Was I nice to the demo gods this morning? Come on, show me your workflow. Thank you. Now we get on to the bulk of what we're going to be doing today, and that is making sure that our application is there, that we control everything, because we like control. We're software people. We like control. We like to think that we have it. We don't necessarily always. But making sure that we don't lose any of that awesome functionality that comes out of the box with the built-in function. So we are going to be building our code. We're going to be testing our code. We're also going to split it up into two sections, because we want to be able to easily roll back. When you break production, because we always break production, you want to be able to roll back to the previous version without having to roll forward if it's something super bad and everything's broken. So we're going to add that to this, which is over and above what you get out of the box. But for the rest, it's kind of the same. It's going to build it. It's going to deploy it. We're going to have working pull requests at the end of it in 30 minutes. Let's see. This, of course, is on a push or on a pull request. So we have automatic workflows here as we need. The others, we know we're not going to run those very often. This one, we need something a bit better. We don't want to run it when we're changing the IAC workflow or the custom domain workflow, because those aren't going to affect your application most likely. If you're not changing your code, you don't need to redeploy anything. Ignore the backup. That's just so that it doesn't keep on redeploying every time I make a change during my demos. The pull request is just exactly the same. Open, synchronize, reopen, closed. So anytime you push code to a pull request, or when you close a pull request, something is going to happen here. And then we need some permissions in order for this to work. We need to be able to read the contents, to be able to check out our pull request. We need to be able to write ID tokens for our authentication. The one that's missing in the built-in action right now is this one here, the pull request write. That was changed an amount of time ago. If you have this, or if you don't have this, when you try and push your pull request and get that update in the comment, you will get an error saying, I can't write to this. And it's a really useful error, as you can imagine, because it's something along the lines of, there's a problem with the resource. It's like, awesome, that's just what I want. That tells me everything I need to know. But yeah, this pull request write, that's what you need to be able to run that. So when we are pushing, and when why is that commented out? That should not be commented out. Otherwise, my pull request is not going to work. When we're pushing, or when we have that pull request, then we come into the building. We're going to set up our version of .NET. .NET 9 for the moment, because static web apps are always late to the party with .NET releases. So I would wait at least 2 weeks from the release of .NET 10 before trying to deploy anything production-worthy into static web apps, because I find you get finicky results for those first 2 weeks, just because of the Azure Function environments kind of have a flowing upgrade. And you might find that one day it deploys and the next day it doesn't. Then we're going to build and publish our applications. We're going to build our client project and our API project. When you have tests, you're going to run the tests. We all have tests, right? Nobody else is doing this without tests. And then once everything is built and tested and you've done everything else that you need to do to ensure that your code is resilient, so adding striker tests or anything else here, then we're going to upload it to an artifact. The last line here, include hidden files true. That is not in any documentation anywhere that I can find for Azure Static Web Apps. And if you take anything away from this today, take that away. Because when you publish your API, there are an amount of hidden files. And by default, when you upload to an artifact, you do not upload the hidden files. Then when you try and deploy it, the Azure Static Web App gets super confused, doesn't throw an error, but also doesn't deploy what you want to know, and you end up pulling your hair out. This undercut, that is not a style choice. That is fighting this to try and get it working. Once we've built it, now we can start to deploy it. So again, on a push or on a pull request, we need to get our artifacts. You don't need to include anything about hidden items on the artifacts. We log into Azure again, obviously. And then we need to get our deploy token. Because in the original flow, the Azure portal created that token inside of our GitHub repo, and we didn't have to think about it. It was just there. Now, not only is the portal not done that, worse than that, we can deploy this on demand. We can delete it, recreate it. We never know what our deploy token is. So rather than storing that inside of a secret in GitHub and having to update it every time you do something, we're going to use the Azure Static Web App to list the secrets for our static web app in our resource group, the API key, and we're going to make sure that this doesn't get put into the log, because you don't want people to read the logs and then be able to deploy to your to your static web app. I tried to do this in a different way originally, and I discovered that GitHub workflows, you cannot pass a masked variable between jobs. So this one you have to do every time you want to use it, you need to do it inside of the same job. Once we have that, then we need to set our environment because we want to support pull requests, how we're doing. So that's really easy. If you're pushing, then you're going to production. If you're not pushing, then we know that we're in a pull request, and the event number, which is your pull request number, we're just going to turn that into our staging environment name so that we can find it in the future. Then, to deploy our .NET application, we're going to install Node. I absolutely hate this step. And this is where I said that AZ Static Web App does about 90% of what you need to do. What it doesn't do is deploy Azure Static Web Apps for you. So for that, once we have Node installed, we are going to install the Static Web Apps CLI, which is a Node application that gives us access to what we need. Then we're going to do the deploying, and you can also run this from the command line, which is kind of cool. So if you're developing locally, you can just use this command line to push directly from your machine and update your application on the fly. You have to set some things up in the config. Looking at the time, I'm not going to do that. But this is going to be a public repo, and it's going to be available for some time. I'll put it on Blue Sky and LinkedIn after the session so you can take a look yourself. You just need to tell it where it can find things in the static web app. That is something that changed. Previously, you could specify all of this in the command line, and then that stopped working for some reason. The CLI does like breaking changes. I don't know why. Then, for our pull requests, and only for our pull request, we want to find out where did we just deploy to. So we're going to do that same environment list that we used in the custom domains, only now we're going to be looking for the host name to contain our environment number, because it always will do. And finally, we're going to update the pull request using the GitHub script. This is what you need that write permissions for the pull request for, so that you can send this in. And we're just going to say, hey, this host was set up, it was pushed by this person, and just allow you to click on it to go further. Lastly, when you close a pull request, we still need to clean up what we did. Now, this is easy. This one is just on a pull request when it's closed. So we don't need to do too much inside of here to think. We need to log in with the Azure command line again, because believe it or not, whilst you cannot deploy an application with the AZ Static Web App command, you cannot remove a deploy using the Static Web Apps CLI. There needs to be a little bit more joined up thinking here. It is one of my favorite resources, but I appreciate there's some gaps that really need filling. So that one, let's pull that one in. Let's push this, add, build. Is it going to build in 4 minutes? That is an interesting question. We will find out. Not that one, that one. Hey, our DNS worked. So if we come inside our static web app now, has it already validated? It's already validated. So you can see that my URL in the portal is now pointing to stacyclouds.com. And when we go to that, we have nothing because the deploy is still happening. She says, hopefully. Oh! Sorry? Of course, there's an extra space in the YAML. I hate YAML. Does anybody actually like YAML? Just as a general question in the room, does anybody like YAML, or do we all just suffer for it? Okay, so trust me, that does work when you don't put the stupid extra spaces in the YAML file. The last thing that I want to talk about, you know what? Let's go back to Kermit, because Kermit's better than looking at an error screen. There we go. The thing that we need to talk about here is the authentication. The reason why I made it a standard application. When you log into an Azure Static Web App with default authorization, you get a unique user ID. If you log into a second one, you get a different unique user ID. If you can delete and deploy your applications on demand, and you are using those user IDs, you are going to get orphan records in your database, probably, if you're using them for anything like that. So once you move into this, it's kind of a given. You're doing something more serious. Take the paid version. Use Custom Authentication. You can still go via Microsoft or GitHub. And you also have, I believe, Twitter, Apple, Google, Facebook, maybe, and OpenID Connect, so Auth0 and all the others. Once you do that, the ID then comes from the authority that's doing the authorizing. It never changes, and you don't have this issue. 2 minutes. Right, I always have to show this slide for this talk, because the reason why I first wrote this several years ago, on top of it being a Spite talk, was because I wanted to play with some of the functionality inside of GitHub workflows. It wasn't something I'd done at the time, and Max, Oscar, and Rick helped me with the stuff inside of the GitHub Actions parts, that when you're a complete noob to GitHub workflows and you're going, what the hell does this do? They could kind of give me pointers, put me in the right direction, and they could check my work afterwards to make sure I wasn't standing here telling you something that was completely BS. So thanks to them, as always. So that was a very whirlwind tour that didn't work. I am going to try and fix this. So if you go to www.stacy-clouds.com at some point today, hopefully you will see that there is a deployed Blazor application that works. Hopefully. I hope that it's at least shown you some of the stuff that you can do with this, that it's taken away the idea that static web apps are just this toy for little things, and you can actually incorporate it into a bigger picture and use it for a lot more stuff than just hosting your personal website. That is the book that I'm releasing. It's not out yet because I'm currently fighting with the printing people, trying to get no extra spaces in my YAML files or removing lines from my YAML files. Once out there, it should be out end of November, and it basically covers this in the last chapter. I really hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have an awesome conference, and thanks so much for coming here and listening to me today.